Let's just jump right in with a number that, honestly, it really stops you in your tracks. 1 in 4. In the UK, that's the number of people who will face a mental health problem in any given year. So right off the bat, we know this isn't some fringe issue. We're talking about one of the biggest public health challenges out there.
And for so many of those 1 in 4, this image, well, it probably feels a little too familiar, right? That feeling of running and running and running, but never actually getting anywhere. It's such a powerful picture of this modern kind of distress, that sense of being stuck on a wheel, trapped in a system that just keeps demanding more. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. What is really driving this crisis? We're going to be looking at the arguments laid out in Ian Ferguson's book, Politics of the Mind, which offers a really critical take that challenges a lot of the common ideas we have about mental health. To get us started, let's look at this quote from sociologist C. Wright Mills. He makes this brilliant point about the difference between a personal trouble and a public issue. You know, if one person is out of work, you look at their specific life. But when millions are unemployed, well, then you have to start looking at the society itself. And the book we're talking about applies that very same logic to mental health.
So let's start by looking at this public issue, because as this first section shows, the weight of this crisis is, well, it's not being shared equally at all.
And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? The numbers are so stark. Almost 3/4 of people in the lowest income group report having a mental health problem. Now compare that to the highest income group. It's still high, but it's down at 59%. There is an absolutely undeniable link between how much you struggle financially and how much you struggle mentally.
And to really get our heads around the sheer scale here, this statistic is just wow. In the UK, mental health issues make up a bigger burden of disease than cancer and heart disease put together. So think about that. We are talking about the single biggest health challenge a society faces, and it's one that hits the most vulnerable people the hardest. Which brings us to the absolute core of the book's argument. If this is such a huge, unequal social problem, then why do we so often treat it like it's a purely individual one? Let's dive into our next section, which really challenges that conventional way of thinking. This is the big question, the one the author really wants us to wrestle with. It asks us to shift our whole focus, to stop looking only inside someone's head for, say, a chemical imbalance, and to start looking outside, at the world, at the social and economic pressures that might be making them unwell in the first place. And here you have it, the book's direct and pretty provocative answer. It makes the case that the constant pressure, the inequality, the feeling of alienation that's just baked into our economic system, that this is a primary cause of all the distress we see around us. Now that's a huge claim, and for the rest of this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly how the author builds that case. So to really understand this argument, we kind of have to take a step back and look at how our current ideas about mental health even came to be. This section traces that history, from old-school asylums to the diagnostic manuals we use today, a process the book calls the medicalization of everyday life. At the heart of how we approach things now is what's known as the medical model. Basically, it treats mental distress just like any other physical illness, like a broken bone or a virus. It's seen as a malfunction in the machine of the body, something you can identify and then fix, usually with drugs. It's all about finding those objective biological causes.
And you can see the result of that model in action right here. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is basically the official handbook for psychiatric disorders. And just look at the explosion in the number of conditions you can be diagnosed with, from about 100 in 1952 to nearly 300 today.
Now, as you can imagine, this massive expansion has drawn some serious criticism, which the book lays out. Critics worry that it starts to turn normal, painful human experiences, like grief, into medical disorders. They point to potential conflicts of interest with drug companies, but maybe most importantly, this approach can totally push the social causes of suffering into the background, and it risks over-medicating people, especially kids and the elderly.
Okay, so if we start to question that purely medical explanation, what's the alternative? Well, this leads us to what is maybe the book's most powerful and memorable idea for understanding this whole shift.
The author argues that we've moved from an age of picket lines to an age of worry lines. Picket lines, they represent people coming together publicly to fight a problem that's outside of them, like low wages or unsafe conditions. Worry lines, on the other hand, represent taking all those pressures and turning them inward, where they become personal stress, anxiety, and depression. And look, this isn't just a clever phrase. The data really seems to back it up. In the UK, as the number of workdays lost to strikes absolutely plummeted, the number of days people missed for work-related stress went through the roof.
The misery didn't just disappear, it was privatized. It turned inward. The fight moved from the factory floor into our own minds.
And that brings us right back to where we started, back to that fundamental question. If our anxiety, our burnout, our depression, if they aren't just isolated personal failings, but are actually symptoms of a much bigger public issue, then doesn't that change everything about how we should respond? The book argues that yes, it absolutely does. And it leaves us with a really big thought. What would a truly collective response to our collective distress even look like?